Welcome to the Commonwealth Policy Center Candidate Forum. I'm Richard Nelson, Executive Director of the Commonwealth Policy Center. There is an open seat for Kentucky Commissioner of Agriculture. A few days ago, we had Richard Heath, State Representative from Graves County, in to share with you about where he stood on the issues. Today, we have Jonathan Schell, former Majority Leader of the Kentucky State House, and he is also vying for Commissioner of Agriculture on the May 16th primary. Jonathan, welcome to this forum.
I really appreciate it, Richard. Thanks for having me, and I apologize for having to be remote today.
Jonathan, we appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule and joining us. I know you are literally on the campaign trail today, and appreciate you joining us. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and why you're running for this position?
Absolutely. I appreciate it, Richard, and thanks for the opportunity. And thank you for what you do with the CPC organization and fighting for Christian values across the state of Kentucky. You've always been a friend of mine, and I really appreciate what you stand for, what the organization stands for, and what you all are trying to accomplish. So I'm a fifth-generation farmer. I'm a conservative, Christian, Republican, and our farming operation looks like this. We run beef cattle. We do a background operation and a cow-calf herd. We also have flower greenhouses. We're about 2 acres under roof in the greenhouse where we'll raise about 25,000 hanging baskets a year, about 20,000 flats on the ground. Your listeners in central Kentucky, some of the people that we sell to are like Sunshine Grove Center, King's Gardens, Louis Flower Power, and then we also sell their retail out of our location in Lancaster on 52 going towards Richmond. And then 2 years ago, I got in the biggest racket of my life, Richard, started growing something that feels illegal, but it's legal. And it's not what you think it is. It's pumpkins. It's my favorite thing I've ever grown. I love the pumpkin business. We used to grow about 200 acres of tobacco, and you can't really take a 5-year-old kid out in the tobacco patch and have them do much. But I've got 4 kids myself. One of them's a 5-year-old little girl, and she works just as hard as any man or woman in a pumpkin patch that I've ever seen. And so it's just a family farm operation. We work every single day. It's held together with baler twine and barbed wire. It's nothing special. It's just a working farm here in central Kentucky. My political career, I ran for state representative in 2012 and became the youngest state representative in Kentucky. And as you know, with the work that you and I did together for many years, we were in the minority for 100 years in the House of Representatives. I got tired of that, and I asked them to make me the chairman of the House Republican Campaign Committee. I traveled the state for 2 years, putting 70,000 miles on my vehicle, recruiting great candidates across the state of Kentucky, some who are still serving today strongly, not only in the House, but in the Senate. And we were able to take the majority in 2016. And after that, my caucus made me the first in the history of the state Republican majority leader and the youngest in the nation. And we changed this state forever. We passed right to work, prevailing wage, made the state one of the most pro-life states in the nation, passing pro-life legislation. We took the chokehold of government off of small businesses and businesses in the state to where that we could help move our economy in the right direction. And the reason that I'm running for Commissioner of Agriculture is because over those years of being involved in public service, I saw that we have to have a strong voice in agriculture. We've had a great voice in Jamie Comer and Ryan Quarles, and I want to continue that path of excellence in the Department of Agriculture because we're seeing a change in what our state looks like agriculturally and what's happening coming from Washington, D.C., of just the overreach that they're pushing down. And I'm tired of playing defense. I'm ready to play offense and fight back.
Jonathan, you mentioned the distinctives between you and your opponent, Richard Heath, and I know you served together in the legislature. So kind of on the personal side, isn't that tough to vie for a seat like Commissioner of Agriculture with a former colleague? And as far as I know, you guys are friends. Is that a tough to be in?
No, for me, it's not hard. I come from a very Republican area of the state. I've always had primaries every time that I've ran for office. I think primaries make you a better candidate in the general election. And as far as running against friends, I don't have anything bad to say about Richard Heath. He's a good man. I made him ag chairman whenever I was majority leader in the House of Representatives, and he's done a good job as being chairman. And you'll never hear me say anything bad about him or his service in Frankfort. I tell people that he's a great guy. He's just not the right guy.
Okay. What would be your biggest experience as majority leader in the Kentucky House that would translate into you being a good Commissioner of Agriculture? I say experience, but maybe one of the strong takeaways that could translate into you being a good Commissioner of Agriculture.
I think it's all about relationships. And what I learned whenever I got to Frankfurt, I came in very headstrong, coming from the private sector. I never had a boss in my life except family, working with my dad, my granddad. And so whenever I wanted to, tag cattle on the farm, I didn't have to go to anybody and ask them. I just went and did it. When I wanted to change oil in the tractors, I just did it. And whenever you get to Frankfurt, you've got to build coalitions, you've got to build relationships in order to accomplish the things that you want to do. And I feel like that's something that I excelled at a tremendous amount. When I first got to Frankfurt, I think many people would say that, I made a lot of people mad because I saw things that were not going in the right direction, and I vocalized that and kind of alienated myself at the start. But what I learned was that it didn't matter how smart I was. It didn't matter how talented I was, or how talented I may have thought I was, or how smart I may have thought I was. If you can't communicate and you can't build relationships with people, you can't get anything done. And by the time that I left Frankfurt, I was the majority leader. My caucus, I ran unopposed, unanimously elected to that position, and have those great relationships currently. And it's not just in the state legislature. It's across the state of Kentucky. I've got 45 of the 73 Republican county judges across the state who have endorsed our campaign. And many of those are just because I didn't get a chance to talk to them before we released that. The reason they're not on the list. Got strong ties with our magistrates, our mayors, our commissioners across the state, and in our federal delegation, very strong ties to all of our congressmen and senators there. And so whenever I think about one of the things that really helped me understand what leadership meant whenever I was majority leader was it was all about relationships. It matters more that you know who somebody's wife and kids are and their dreams and aspirations than it does about how talented or smart you may be.
Jonathan, you identify as a fiscal conservative, not just identify, but you worked for fiscally conservative policies while in the state house. Currently, the legislature is moving to eliminate the state income tax. This latest move dropped it to 4%. It will continue to phase out if Kentucky meets its benchmarks. Part of this discussion is as the state income tax is being phased out, the sales tax base is being broadened and expanded into other areas. This might be the toughest question I ask you, but should that state sales tax be expanded to ag-related production, tractors, fencing, that kind of thing? So no, tell us why. Is that not fair to the other industries that do have to pay sales tax?
Well, so for agriculture, we're very unique because everything we sell, for the most part, we sell wholesale and we buy everything retail as inputs. And that's a huge difference in most industries across the state of Kentucky. They're selling, for the most part, an end product for retail service, and they're buying on the wholesale side to create that retail product. We do it the complete opposite in most agriculture-related businesses. For example, I buy bulk fertilizer at the retail level, but I sell cattle at the wholesale level. I don't sell burgers and steaks. And so that's the biggest reason to me that we need to keep those things protected. And we need to make sure that we always keep that protected, because what we continue to do is we continue to make it very difficult for us as farmers to supply the world's food source. And we have to make it easier and more profitable for that to happen, because what you're seeing is that farmers, as they're aging out, there's not the next generation coming behind them, because profitability has been squeezed so hard and regulations have been shoved down farmers' throats so forcefully that it's not advantageous for a lot of young people to get in. And so one of the things that I want to do as commissioners, be that voice for our ag community, be that voice for our farmers, to help create pathways for new markets, better markets, expand markets, and also for the transfer of wealth from generation to generation, to make it easier for aging farmers to be able to transfer that wealth, not only necessarily to their heirs that may come behind them, but those that don't have heirs, of finding a pathway for them to find a young farmer in the community that's willing to step up and help feed this world.
Jonathan, what are some things that you would be opposed to if you were elected next Kentucky's Commissioner of Agriculture? And when I say federal policies, is there EPA overreach that makes it tougher to farm? Or, as you were just talking about, are there transfer of wealth issues that make it burdensome for a farmer to pass on their farm to either that next generation or a young person, as you mentioned, to carry on the farming tradition?
Yeah, Democrats in Washington are always trying to push back down on us the estate tax, which has to be protected and gotten rid of. The threshold needs to be high on that, because small businesses and farmers it doesn't take long for them to hit that threshold whenever you're on land and assets. And so that's one. Another one is WOTUS, Waters of the U.S. What the federal government and the EPA is trying to do is to make it when it rains on my farm, that if a puddle comes up, they're trying to consider that to be navigable waters. And what that does is adds a tremendous amount of regulation that comes in that is just that we don't need. Other things that they're trying to get rid of are safe chemicals like atrazine and other things that help us to stave off weeds and with herbicides. They're trying to get rid of these chemicals that have been safe for decades and decades. And what we've got to do is continue to have science at the forefront of this to where that we can push back against the narratives. You know, organizations like Sierra Club and PETA and these radicals that are in Washington want you to believe that farmers are beating their animals, that they're eroding the soil, and that they're poisoning the ground. And it's just not true. It's not the case. They also want you to believe that farmers all across the country and in Kentucky are these corporate farms. Well, 99.9% of farms in the state of Kentucky are family owned. There's a face like mine behind it, like my kids, like my dad, my wife. And one of the things that I want to do as Commissioner of Agriculture is promote on-farm retail and local markets across the state, because when consumers are able to see face-to-face these farmers where they know who their farmer is, it's hard for them to believe what they see on TikTok and coming from these radical organizations whenever it's coming straight from the farmer's mouth. We need to get closer from the farm gate to the food plate with our consumers, more direct-to-consumer activity across the state with our ag products.
Jonathan, Richard Heath introduced a bill that would prevent foreign entities that are hostile to the United States from purchasing Kentucky agriculture properties. What are your thoughts on that? Is that something you would have been in favor of?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we've got to protect our farmland from foreign investment that may be radicalized. But at the same time, we've just got to make sure that we nuance that to where that people who are legitimate that are trying to come into our country and help the economy here, that we're not looking as though we're xenophobic to people. And so there's a fine line that we've got to travel down, but we need to have some kind of vetting in place to make sure that these countries that are hostile to America are not only stealing our resources, but stealing our intellectual property. That's the thing that concerns me the most about them being here, is not that they're owning land, but what are they doing with that land, and how are they stealing our businesses and our corporations and our people's here's wealth of knowledge that we've created.
Sure. Of course, the biggest concern is China. They have attempted to purchase farmland close to U.S. military installations, and other states have preempted that. They have passed legislation. Unfortunately, Kentucky did not. It did pass the House. It stalled in the Senate. So we'll see if this comes up. If it does come up next session, and if you're elected, is this something that you'd make a priority to push for this legislation?
Yeah, we'll certainly work on it and find out what the reasons were that it didn't pass this session, and we'll work through that to try and get it done.
Jonathan, a couple of years ago, a bill was proposed in the legislature that would have prevented the use of food stamps towards unhealthy food or drinks, sugary drinks, absolute junk food that had very little or negative nutritional value. And is that something you would weigh in on if you were elected to the Commissioner of Agriculture position? This is where people use food stamps again to purchase stuff that contributes to obesity, contributes to diabetes, contributes to it doesn't contribute to health, but it undermines health. Is that something you'd be in favor of?
Yeah, I'm very familiar with that. I think, Richard, if I'm not mistaken, if we look back in the records, I think I sponsored that bill myself whenever I was there, maybe in the minority party. It could have been whenever I was majority leader. If not, I think I filed a resolution to that effect to try and figure that out. Welfare reform is something that we've got to have in this state to be able to get people back to work, back in the workforce. I think that's the only way that we fix our workforce problem, is getting people off of public assistance that are able-bodied. I'm not talking about people who desperately need it. We need to take care of our people who need these resources that are not capable of doing it themselves. We've got to take care of them. But there is ways that we can do this. And the thing that we've got to focus on is getting a Republican governor or a Republican president so that we can get Medicaid waivers and other things like that through the EBT food stamp programs, to where that we can get waivers from the federal government to make this more of an experimental state, to where that we can see what we think as a state works. One of the things that I tried to do whenever I was a majority leader was create a sliding scale benefit system, to where that, let's just say for round numbers, you had a single mother, 2 kids, and she was getting $2,000 in public assistance. Well, if she tries to go back to work, they're going to take her assistance away. Then she's got to start paying child care. It just doesn't make sense for someone like that if they're not making enough money to be able to go back to work. So what I said was, let's say that that woman decides that she wants to go back and work at McDonald's and she makes $1,000 that month. Well, let's not kick her off her welfare. Let's continue to pay her the additional $1,000. And I even went a step further and said, let's increase it by 25%. Let's make sure that she's whole to where that she gets child care. It's saving the taxpayer still $750, but we're giving her an additional $1,250 that she can continue to work. And what that does is that gives her dignity in life to where that she's working and being productive, and she's going to continue to do that to where eventually she's going to be self-sustainable again. We've got to continue to work on getting the welfare systems in this state back in line with people to where that it's not a hand out, but it's a hand up. And I love the fact that for EBT and food stamps specifically, that you can buy fresh foods at your local farmers markets and also plants. So, I was down in Eastern Kentucky not long ago at one of the farmers markets, and one of the great programs that they have in Letcher County and in Eastern Kentucky is the Double Bucks program, to where that if you go and you buy fresh foods with your food stamp cards, that the hospitals will basically write a prescription to double the amount of produce that you can get. Great program coming from the private sector, something that's really helping out. It does a couple of things. It helps increase profitability for our farmers, and it gets fresher foods into our most vulnerable citizens who are not healthy. And a healthy Kentucky is a strong Kentucky. And what we've got to do is focus on getting us to be a strong Kentucky, mind, body, and spirit.
I think it's good that we look at an issue comprehensively. As you said, you look at the mind, body, and spirit. This is part of what it means to be human. You mentioned work, the dignity of work. Kentucky has one of the lowest workforce participation rates in the country. I often talk with business owners that are having a hard time finding people to do the jobs. Is the same true in the ag industry? Are farmers and ag-related industries having a tough time finding workers?
Yeah, everybody I talk to is in the same experience. It doesn't matter if you're a Fortune 500 company or if you're a farmer trying to raise 10 acres of tobacco. It's hard to be able to get people to work right now.
Jonathan, what could you do if you were elected Commissioner of Agriculture to increase workforce participation? I'm not sure if there's anything in the official capacity of that job they could do it, but it's a concern for all of us. Is there anything that you can see that could be done there?
Absolutely, I think so, and I think two things that we can advocate for on the state level that we can actually affect is waivers for what we're just talking about, of trying to get waivers from the federal government to get work requirements engaged into our welfare programs, and also getting these people back into the workforce specifically. And so you're adding people back into the pool. Another thing I think is advocating for second chance employment as we get people that are being rehabilitated for drug use, that we're giving them tools, skills, and certificates to where that they can be productive citizens again. And working with our drug rehabilitation centers in several different capacities. One of those is getting fresh foods into them through maybe certain programs that we can work at or that are existing, and then working towards trying to get second chance employment as a priority for our agriculture community and our ag businesses and farms.
Jonathan, we've talked about tobacco. That's come up a few times in this conversation. Tobacco isn't what it used to be. There are fewer and fewer farmers growing it. The buyouts, federal government buyout, has led many to leave it altogether. When this was happening, and when farmers saw the writing on the wall that tobacco is not the future, hemp was introduced as the solution. This was a cash crop. It grows quickly, little inputs, and this is a way that could replace tobacco. Was that the case?
No, and I would say that there was about a 20-year gap between the tobacco buyout and hemp production in the state of Kentucky. So I would say that it wasn't introduced as a solution to that. I think what a lot of people got caught up in, including myself, was that it could be an alternative to supplementing back the income that tobacco was for farmers in the state of Kentucky. And the hemp program was run in the state of Kentucky to the best of its ability, but we have a lot of federal issues that need to be taken care of before I think that it's going to be a truly viable crop. My farm, Shell Farms, was one of those farmers that got involved in the hemp industry. We were involved with a company that went bankrupt, and they still owe us a lot of money. And there's farmers like me and my dad and my brother that are going to be, that were hurt by this all across the state of Kentucky. And we've just got to be diligent whenever we're bringing in new industries to ensure that we're not affecting things like we did with the hemp industry. I think that was a very big learning experience for a lot of people. And my dad tells me all the time, the hardest lessons in life are the ones that are earned. And we definitely earned that lesson on Shell Farms. And I think as the state of Kentucky, we've just got to be diligent as we look into the future that we're very protective of our resources in the state and making sure that that we have markets available that are viable for people to be able to sell their crops. And I think that there's still potential in the hemp industry for it to be something that is sustainable, but we've got a lot of work to do on that program still.
Jonathan, related to hemp production is marijuana. Of course, the state legislature legalized medicinal use of marijuana. Some are arguing that let's just legalize marijuana for recreational use. This is an egg product, and it could be taxed, and more money would come into state coffers through that. What are your thoughts on legalizing marijuana as a crop to be used recreationally?
Yeah, I'm not in favor of recreational legalization of marijuana. I'm a new supporter of medical marijuana over the last couple of years. Whenever it was first talked about 10 years ago, whenever I was in the legislature, I was opposed to it. I think that the path that the legislature has taken on medical marijuana seems to be appropriate at this point. It's a very concealed program, something that's very tied together. I think there's still a lot of questions that have to be answered through the regulation part of this, and it's something that I'm going to be very interested in keeping an eye on as we move forward. CHFS is the regulatory agency under that. There's no role for the Department of Agriculture that they wrote into the bill. I think that there is some potential for maybe new legislation to look at the growing side of this as being something that's oversaw by the department. But as far as recreational and expansion of marijuana in the state, I'm not in favor of doing that at all. But for the medicinal purposes, if it's done correctly through doctors, prescriptions, those kind of things, I'm for doing that. My mother was really the one that kind of changed my attitude on it, and she asked me if I got an acute illness and I was going to be put on highly addictive opioids, or if there was an alternative for me to be able to have medical marijuana, which would you rather have? And when that question's posed to me, we've been completely destroyed in this country by opioids, and the answer is pretty clear to me that I would rather her be on medical marijuana than opioids. And I know that that's not a lot of times a good comparison or an easy thing to have to make a decision on. But now that we've got it, it's in the legislature, it's passed. I think that now we have to see how can we prevent this from being something that's, one, abused as a system, and two, something that can actually help the people that needs the help to get it.
Sure. Jonathan, there's much talk of food insecurity. This is something that the current Commissioner of Agriculture, Ryan Quarles, has spoken on. Would this be an issue of concern or priority if you were elected Commissioner of Agriculture?
Yeah, we've got to make sure that we're taking care of the most vulnerable citizens in the state, and most of those are children and the elderly. When you go to your food banks or you talk to your food banks across the state of Kentucky and your listeners, I would encourage you to do so. The one here in Garrett County, they tell me that almost 70% of the people who utilize the food bank in Garrett County is over the age of 65, and that's very concerning. And so we've got to ensure that as fortunate as we are as a country, as fortunate as we are as a state, that we're working towards making sure that our most vulnerable populations are taken care of. And I think that food insecurity is one easy thing for the most part that we can really do. I think that getting churches involved, getting our local communities involved, and helping provide avenues for them to be able to get fresh foods into their bodies to where that they're not having to eat the junk that we were talking about earlier, but they're actually getting fresh food sources, I think is extremely important. I'm on the CASA board of Lexington, which is the court-appointed special advocates. I have two adoptive children of my own that came from very turmoil situations. And on the younger side, the children's side of this, it's something that's extremely important to me. And I've actually thought about through the Hunger Initiative that Ryan has had of doing some kind of special program inside of that, of highlighting maybe foster parents and foster kids across the state of Kentucky to ensure that if there's a need there for food insecurity, that we're helping take care of that as well.
Very good. We are winding down. I know you've got to get back on the campaign trail. One more question about a policy from the Kentucky Department of Agriculture, and this is the Kentucky Proud program, where Kentucky-grown products are highlighted and marketed at the retail level. How important is this Kentucky Proud program?
I think it's extremely important, and one of the reasons that I think so is that our brand globally, as Kentucky itself, is extremely high. When you think about Kentucky Derby, Kentucky Fried Chicken, Kentucky Bourbon, Kentucky products are extremely known across the world. And one of the things that I think that we can do to help increase our domestic spend or our ourselves that the more that we can get in consumers' minds that these are fresh, that they're abundant, and that they are available locally, more people will choose to be able to get them. And so helping create these on-farm markets, these local markets, enhancing those to where that people have the opportunity to get them more available, I think is extremely important. I'm going to be a big advocate for the Kentucky Proud program and our farmers across the state of Kentucky, and trying to find new ways, innovative ways to be able to promote that program, not only locally, but nationwide and globally.
Jonathan, we're going to wind down this program. At the beginning of the forum, you talked about you were a conservative, a Christian, and you're a Republican. How does your faith influence and shape how you campaign and how you arrive at your policy positions?
You know, it's the most important thing in my life, Richard. I think that you and we've talked enough that I hope that you know that as well, and you see that in the life that I live. You know, I just actually gave up being the Sunday school director at my church. We try to rotate that every so often. I still teach Sunday school at my church in Pilot Mountain Missionary Baptist in Madison County. You know, my kids came to faith at home. You know, they didn't have somebody else that witnessed to them. They didn't do it at a vacation Bible school. My wife and I, we do Bible study with our children. We homeschool our children as well. We did that because we wanted to give them a faith-based education. And 3 of my 4 kids have now came to faith, and that's probably the most important thing that I think that we can do as humans. You know, I'll give me just a second, if you don't mind, Richard, to ramble a little bit, but I've been really upset here lately over a lot of the stuff that we've seen nationally from this transgender movement, things that are going on, and just trying to understand how people believe so much different than I do, where we got that disconnect. And so I actually taught in 1 Timothy 4 through 16 this past Sunday, and it was based around false doctrine versus truth. And the conclusion that I came to with our Sunday school classes is this has been happening since Jesus. You know, this has been happening since the fall of Adam and Eve, that we've been under attack from Satan and evil in this world, that, you know, things that man call good, God does not. And so the realization that I've come to here lately is that I need to affect the things that I can affect. And the things that I can affect is my local community. I can affect my family, my church, and be the best husband, father, and Christian to my kids and my wife that I can, and my family, and affect those things. And that's going to spread out, and that's going to be a witness to other people. And so that's how I try to live my life. I try to affect the things that I know that I can affect. And it's the key component to everything that I do in my life, whether it's on the farm, whether it's in business, whether it's in my family, my church, or in my politics. And you know, I try to use every position that I have to be kind and loving to people, but to also not compromise on my faith and my values while I'm doing that. And you know, it's tough sometimes to do that whenever you're in politics, but I think that we owe that to be authentically who we are. And you know, that means to me, what that means is that I'm a follower of Christ, and my measuring stick, my ruler in my life, is not how good I am compared to Richard Nelson. It's not how good I am compared to somebody else. It's how good I am compared to Jesus Christ. And he is my measuring stick in my life. And I come short of that every single day. And I thank God that I have a Savior like Jesus Christ that has washed my sins away, that whenever I get to heaven, that I'm going to hear, come in, thou good and faithful servant. And that is my goal in life. That's my goal in my public service. I come short every single day. I'm a sinner saved by grace. And my faith is what leads me in my life. It's what leads my wife. And it's hopefully what leads our family in the right direction, to where that my kids can have that same attitude and that same drive in their life as well.
Very good. Thank you for sharing that, Jonathan. Last question is, if you're elected to the Commissioner of Agriculture post, what kind of people would you surround yourself with? And let me be a little more focused there. What character traits do you look for in the kind of advisors you'd have there, kind of top level officials that you'd have representing you and your administration?
Yeah, I want a mix of people who have big ideas, that they are always trying to get to a yes, not coming to me with a no. How do we get to a yes on the big ideas that we need to be able to move the state in the right direction and move agriculture in the right direction? The other thing is that I don't micromanage people. When I give somebody a task, a role, and a job, I give that to them because I don't want to do it. It's not my role to do that. I give it to you so that you can do it. And I try not to micromanage people. And I need people who I can trust, that whenever I give them a role and an opportunity, to perform, that they're doing that to their best ability. And I think that those two things are the main priorities that I have, is that people who are always looking towards big ideas, who are trying to get to a yes, and who are actively trying to get the job done the correct way. And we outside of that, we obviously have to have people of character and integrity, that we're always checking ourselves to make sure that we're doing things ethically and legally right.
Very good. Jonathan Shell, you will have the last word. Tell the voters, 30 seconds here, why they should vote for you on Tuesday, May the 16th. Actually, let me just add this. The polls will be open more than just one day. They are open for 3 days. Polling locations have varied. There are fewer polling locations now than there were just a few years ago. So you can find out your polling location by calling your county clerk's office. But make sure you get out and vote. Again, May the 16th is the primary, but it starts a few days before that. So, Jonathan, floor is yours. Tell the voters why they should vote for you in the Republican primary for Commissioner of Agriculture.
Thank you, Richard. And I'll make it real short. If you want somebody who's a fighter, who's willing to get and stand up and push back against the radicalism that's coming out of Washington, D.C., if you want somebody who is going to bring big ideas and the right ideas to the Department of Agriculture, and you want somebody who has the relationships to be able to get the job done to move this state in the right direction, then I'm your guy. When I wake up in the morning, I fight for three things. I fight for my family, I fight for my farm, and I fight for conservative values. And I want to be your fighter as Commissioner of Agriculture to move this state in the right direction.
All right. Jonathan Shell, thank you so much for joining us on this forum, and best wishes to you on the campaign trail.